If I want to know what's wrong with my car, I'm going to go talk to my dad, the mechanic.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go talk to the banker. I'm not going to talk to the shoemaker or, the restaurant owner, whatever. So if I'm interested in figuring out a problem relating to the environment, I want to talk to a scientist. Now, talking about sharing opinions, and it's such an important part of public discourse and exchange. But of course, in science, we have opinions, but we deal with data.
Yeah.
And you can interpret that data how you would like, but we're going to try to hold you to what the data is actually showing, what that trend is or is not or whatever, based on the data, not based on how I feel about the issue.
Hi, welcome to this episode of Help Me Understand with Dr. Thomas Jeffrey. Today my guest is Dr. Richie Kessler. We're going to be talking about biology and the environment. Dr. Kessler is a professor of biology and environmental studies at Campbellsville University and has a deeply held passion for conservation biology, especially in regard to his home state of Kentucky and the Green River area. He has served as chair of the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund. Dr. Kessler has also assisted Kentucky Educational Television in developing programs to help bring an awareness of the state's biodiversity. Most recently, he has been selected to serve on the Bernheim Forest Board of Trustees. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Thomas.
All right. I look forward to our discussion. And one of the things I want to ask first is, where's your favorite place? Where's your favorite place to get back to nature?
Gosh, I'd have to say, for me, that favorite place is probably my family farm. It's a very special place to me. It's not a world-renowned nature preserve or national park or anything of that sort, but it's the place that I have a lot of childhood memories growing up. It's a place probably where I first started experiencing the outdoors on a very personal basis. So for me, I'd have to say, when I need to get away, when I need to get outside, I am one of the fortunate few, however, who have a place like that I can call my own, because so many people in our world today, the vast majority of people in the world today, don't actually have the benefit of owning a place that has nature associated with it. So they depend heavily on public parks and national forests and other things that we're also very blessed with, not only in our country but in the state of Kentucky. So for me, I have lots of favorite places. I just got back from the Smoky Mountains during our fall break last week with my wife Sonia, and we had a wonderful couple days away there. But here at home, it's Russell Creek and Green River.
Out the back door.
Out the back door, yeah. And I just would encourage people, not to sell their backyard short. It was a very disturbing statistic that came out a few years ago that told us, I think, a little bit about ourselves that maybe we didn't fully appreciate. And the interview was of some grade school age children, or the survey, and it was a little disturbing to me that that age of children, they were not able to identify over 10 things in their backyard, natural things, but yet they could identify over 100 corporate logos, symbols, advertisements, etc.
So when you say things, I mean, trees would be an obvious thing.
Absolutely, yes, or a grasshopper, or a tadpole, or
So they would show them a picture and say, "Can you name this?"
Exactly.
Or they would show them the logo.
Yeah,
and
or just ask them, what could they name, just from memory, from time spent in their own backyard or in their local, park. So that has sort of opened our eyes, particularly in the fields of course, I'm more in the field of environmental science as opposed to environmental education. They are very closely related, but there's really been a big push, pre-COVID even, towards the importance of just getting kids outdoors, getting kids in nature. Doesn't have to be a national park or on a river or something like that. It could be something as simple as their backyard, or Clay Hill Forest here in Taylor County would be a great example, because we now are showing that in terms of social development, in terms of mental health, and overall physical health, that children and adults who spend more time out of doors are more fit and probably make better neighbors.
What do you think that is? What happens when you go outdoors and spend a little bit of time?
That's a great question. I think for one thing, some of the things that encumber us on a daily basis that impart a lot of stress to us are usually things that are involved with noise and activity and the physical dimensions that we live on a day in, day out basis. You know, just like driving back and forth from campus to the grocery, or any of your daily activities, you're really honed in, you're really locked in, and I think nature represents a certain degree of freedom. You know, you're there on your terms, you're meeting nature on its terms, and you're not so chained or bound to everyone else's agenda, and pollution as a process or as a subject in and of itself is more than just water pollution or air pollution. It's also things like noise pollution that we're surrounded by.
We forget about that.
We forget about that.
And that happens
I
a
like
lot.
Quiet places.
Yeah.
The older I get, the more I like them.
Yeah. I think that's interesting because one of the things that I do in my class is I give an alternate midterm. So you can do a research paper, or you can do a technology fast. And so the 10% or so who go for the 24-hour fast, right? So it's not like just not for an hour. Many of them end up going on a walk, taking a hike, getting back to nature. And to be honest with you, I can't think of any who have not said the experience was a good one.
Yeah.
But they also said they didn't realize how distracted they were with all the other stuff. And so when I see, especially our campus, so beautiful this time of year, when you see students, and they're not even looking up at the trees and the bushes and everything, that's just, it's amazing.
Yes, yes. And just mentioning the social media obviously has to be part of that discussion of where we are and the importance of nature, and recognizing that importance sometimes is lost because we are so dependent and so enveloped, I would say, within social media. It's a very interesting dichotomy because in conservation and in environmental education, we find ourselves trying to use social media as effectively as we possibly can to get the word out about nature or interesting stories, pictures, whatever the case might be. But just again to kind of remind our audience today, there really is no substitute for immersing oneself actually physically in nature. Yeah. And when I say immersing, it could be immersing to the full extent.
Go scuba diving.
Yeah,
or something.
When it's a little bit warmer maybe than it is right now while we're doing this interview, go to the Green River and maybe intentionally fall out of your kayak during the summer and experience the river in that way. But yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy how on one hand we try to use that as outreach to make sure we have people that are better informed citizens, because we know that the better informed citizens are about the importance of nature in not just their lives but for society as a whole, the more likely they are to be supporters in the future of trying to do a better job of taking care of our planet and taking care of our neighborhoods.
Yeah, and for folks who live sort of close to outside of town, let's say more rural and even suburban areas, finding a little place to get away, or maybe you can still hear the hum of the traffic, but at least that's the challenge is just to make it a part of your life.
Yeah.
And there's so many things that we give our attention to, and of course social media has to be one of the channels that you use, but it's almost I guess you have to evangelize it, and to some degree, it's a spiritual
and we do that, and
journey
too. We do promote that on our campus as a part of the concept we call Earth stewardship, which has to do with a person's Christian responsibility in how they view the gift of the earth and all these natural resources that we have been so abundantly blessed with, that with that comes a certain degree of responsibility from us as the gift receivers.
Right.
And so we certainly promote that to our students, both in the science department as well as on the campus at large. It's something that's kind of been a growing philosophy, if you will, that now our theology department teaches a class called Bible and the Environment.
Okay.
It's one of the courses that their students can take as an elective, and our environmental science majors can also elect to take that course as an elective as well.
Do y'all have anything in the business area?
You know,
I mean,
that's not something we offer right now that is offered as part of those choices, and we'd love to investigate that at some point, because green economics, of course, is a major topic
Absolutely,
of interest
yeah.
as well, and an environmental science student would certainly benefit from having exposure to that.
Yeah, and I think that as we educate, being aware of the social responsibility, whether it's a small business or corporation,
Exactly.
and and to some degree, the larger the business, I think the more responsibility that that there is.
And in some cases, the greater impact can be realized. The larger the institution. You know, we have this saying that I guess it goes back to we go back to the 70s and 80s, certainly.
Right.
But there was a saying that came out sometime around or just after the environmental movement, which we usually classify as being the end of the 60s up until the early 70s with the first Earth Day, that says, think global, act local.
Yeah.
And that still is meaningful today as far as I'm concerned, because the kind of change that we need to have happening to ensure that we have a healthy and sustainable environment for our children and grandchildren, it's the kind of change that does require change to be happening on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So if we can have individuals finding ways to live more sustainably, and we're all at a different place on this walk.
Sure.
Thomas, it's kind of like you can't go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds in most vehicles that we drive. Right. So it might be something as simple as somebody trying to start a recycling program at home, or maybe making better choices in the food they eat and where it's sourced from.
Right.
But it could also be on the other end, like you said, maybe it's a corporation that provides some kind of matching or giving opportunities for their employees to help support some kind of conservation organization, or the way they do their business, they can implement some sustainability strategies.
I know consumers have sometimes shown their appreciation on some, or their acknowledgement that, wait, that wasn't such a good thing.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about large corporations, even though it might just be me alone to abstain from buying that product, that's one thing.
Right.
But when you have a group, abstaining and say no, we're not. That's not good.
I mean, let's face it. We live and would not have it any other way. I mean, we live in a capitalistic society, and sometimes it's survival of the fittest out there in terms of competition in business. And I would, of course, as an individual, I would much rather see us making good decisions as individuals in terms of the purchases we make or whatever, because I know that in turn that will help determine what is being brought to market as far as products and how sustainable those products happen to be. So the more we do that as families and individuals, of course, the better things will be. And I would rather go down that route as opposed to, things getting to a point where we feel like we have to have some kind of regulation or some kind of restriction or some other type of funding mechanism.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you, you mentioned earlier that you were environmental scientist.
Yeah.
And help me understand that a little bit. I mean, you'd mentioned that there's a difference between environmental science and environmental education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on the environmental science part, I'm glad you mentioned that, as a matter of fact, because our Bachelor of Science degree here at CU is a degree in environmental science. My PhD is actually a degree in environmental biology. We view, from our program perspective, the field of environmental science pretty broadly. So to give you an example, we have students at CU that on one hand might be very interested in learning various aspects of the conservation of endangered species, for instance. But we have others that have very strong physical science backgrounds or interest in things like chemistry or physics. And they might be more inclined to try to help solve some environmental problems that have something to do with water pollution or environmental engineering solutions to various problems or issues that we deal with. So we've tried to craft a program that allows students, by taking some, of course, required courses that they all share in common, but then being able to branch out from there for different experiences, different courses to help qualify them to go in one of any number of fields of environmental science. Yeah. And quite frankly, as long as humans are around, you know, on one hand, I hope we always are going to have a desire to better understand and better care for our environment. And on the other hand, unfortunately, we're probably always going to have challenges associated with sustaining our population.
Yeah, I mean, we don't even know.
So it's a market out there for students.
Yeah, and as we're saying that, I think that we don't even know how technology is going to really impact the environment. We know that some of these huge data warehouses and supercomputers are taking a lot of energy to run.
Lots of carbon.
And then, you know, we throw away that device. Sometimes it goes to, you know, a developing country or somewhere, but eventually it ends up broken apart, taken apart, and what can't be salvaged ends up in some pile somewhere. So I think that makes sense. That we'll always have to be thinking about being good stewards.
And even some of the technologies that you mentioned, like our mobile devices or smartphones, whatever we're calling them today, either whatever you want to call them, they are so tangible. We're so used to having them in our hands, and we feel the metal and the plastic and the glass. But to us as an everyday citizen, they're just a mechanism to hopefully make my life easier, better. I'm not convinced that they always do that either. But the environmental truth to that is there's a lot that goes into making some of these devices, and it goes back to natural resources, natural resource extraction and mining and other things that quite frankly can be extremely damaging to our environment, and oftentimes not in our country, even in other countries.
Yeah, and even the component development. I mean, there's
the rare earth metals.
Things have to be put through a process, and that process doesn't always have a good output. I mean, it has the component output, but there's water pollution and other things that.
That's something we oftentimes talk about in a couple of our classes. Of course, we're getting students equipped scientifically, but we also try to make sure they're well informed as they're going through that process. And so with a number of issues regarding natural resource use and extraction, et cetera, we have to do and we are much better now, by the way, in many respects, environmentally speaking, than 4, 5, 6 decades ago. But we're still working on developing a better appreciation for the true cost of doing business from the environmental perspective. We oftentimes historically never considered those costs until now. Sometimes those costs come back to haunt us a little bit. So
we had mentioned a little earlier about if you just go back 100 years. Well, 100 years ago, there were still a lot of people using wood as their fuel.
Primary fuel.
You know, and so coming this far in such a short period of time.
In developed countries, at least, because there are still places in the world where wood, if it's coming in short supply in many places, because it is still being used for a primary fuel source.
I remember, I can't remember the show, but it was set in Britain, England, and actually maybe the teens or the 20s or something, and the smog was so bad, the pollution, it wasn't smog, it was so bad from the coal that was being burned that people were just dying. I mean, it was
it's a human health issue, and continues to be in many of our cities today, of course, with still the burning of fossil fuels, diesel and other things. Still a concern for us today, but when you're going back there talking about a time in history, the Industrial Revolution, when we were seeing all these great advancements, technologically speaking, but they came, like we said, with a cost.
And that trade-off.
And they don't,
you don't realize that
you kind of like the trade-offs to even out or somehow be dealt with on a parallel track, but it just seems like we're always a little bit behind the curve.
We're all plodding ahead as fast as we can, and
trying to catch up on the trade-offs.
And we think the total cost of ownership is the device.
Exactly.
But as you just mentioned, the total cost could be decades, centuries in terms of just either polluting or taking away those precious metals, et cetera.
Exactly.
Well, let me ask you this then. Let's on a lighter note. Why is Kentucky such a wonderful place? I know you have a fondness just because you're a native son, but why is it such a unique environmental, natural?
Well, it's I think we're very similar geographically speaking to places like Virginia. Of course, we were taken out of Virginia initially. Also see some similarities between us and Tennessee. And Tennessee is, I was just down there last week, a beautiful state. For me, though, with regards to Kentucky, there's just not many states that exhibit the diversity of landscapes from one end of the state to another. So if you just think about in Kentucky, this is an old wives' tale, by the way. I've discounted this with my conservation science students because we do a little work, we do a little historical work there, and we do use Kentucky as kind of a focal area, of course, for our work. But there are statements from, I don't know, oftentimes we might attribute it to Daniel Boone or some of our founding fathers or whatever, but that would say that, that at one time a squirrel could climb a tree in eastern Kentucky and never set foot on the ground until he reached the Mississippi River. And
it's a lot of trees.
That's a lot of trees. That's a lot of miles. And probably, the only way that could happen is the squirrel would have to have had a very good knowledge of Kentucky landscapes, because he would know that once he approached where we live right here in south central Kentucky, that very soon he would encounter a place called the Kentucky Meadow. And early French explorers, Michaud and other colleagues, and early natural historians who came into Kentucky when it was truly wilderness, encountered that area and described it as the Great Kentucky Meadow because of the conspicuous absence of trees and forests. And much of that we know now, of course, was due to recurring fire on the landscape. And that's a landscape that most of our viewers and listeners will recognize as also having in its heart Mammoth Cave National Park.
Okay.
And so the reason that Mammoth Cave National Park is Mammoth Cave National Park is because of all the underground water flow that has carved out those channels over the millennia to help form what we now know as Mammoth Cave National Park. But the key term there is underground. So I always pull a map up for my students and have them look at the map. We're so blessed with rivers and streams in Kentucky. That's another thing that makes us very, very special. But when you look at that little chunk of south central Kentucky, all of a sudden the blue lines disappear. And I tell them, the cartographer, the map maker, didn't fall asleep right there or didn't make a mistake. That's reality, because this map is just reflecting what's on the surface. The streams are still there, they just happen to be underground. So back in the days when the Native Americans were more prevalent on the landscape, of course, when they would start a fire, maybe for wildlife management, or if a lightning bolt started a fire, that fire would gain strength gain energy like a wildfire and might run for miles and miles before ever coming up against what we call a fire break. Yeah. A local topographic feature.
A ridge.
Historically, it would be a river,
river,
you know, a water body. You think about a river that runs north-south, and if a fire is barreling down there and it hits that, then all of a sudden it stops. But right. For us, that could go on for miles. So thousands of acres, tens of thousands of acres qualify as what we call barrens. So that squirrel, you know, if he just took off on a direct route going from east to west, you know, he's going to hit the ground eventually.
The only way he'll do that is if a wolf gets him and carries him on to the end, huh?
So that's something about Kentucky that's special to me, is it's varied landscapes.
So if you were looking on the map, you would see blue lines, and then all of a sudden, even those blue lines just stop.
Yep. Yep.
And they go under.
The only blue line, or sometimes I like to say green line, because the Green River.
The green, yeah.
You would see the main stem of the Green River. And of course that doesn't mean that it's not receiving runoff or water from all those other acres where you don't see any surface blue lines.
Right.
It's all coming in on the river bluff or even percolating up from underneath the river. I've been in many places on the river and some of its tributaries, because we have these karst features all over this part of the state, and wading in the river and all of a sudden feel this cold upwelling on your feet and legs, and in the middle of the summer it's really nice. Very refreshing, and that's evidence of a large underground spring somewhere exiting out into the river. And
then on the eastern side you have the Appalachians.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, that's
just a major forest type Appalachian hardwoods of eastern Kentucky that run from, you know, down in Georgia and Tennessee all the way up, you know, the eastern seaboard. And yeah, the mountains of eastern Kentucky, definitely a special place too. Lots of nice rivers over there as well. You know, we've got headwaters of the Cumberland River, pretty dominant feature of eastern Kentucky.
Yeah. And here we have a little bit of all of it, right?
We got a little bit of everything. Most people refer to us as having a hilly landscape. We do have a gently rolling topography. We have knobs. We have places that kind of stick out on the landscape, even as you move down around Hart County and those areas. We got a few little peaks here and there, but you're talking hundreds of feet as opposed to thousands of feet in most cases. But
right.
We are blessed with kind of a mixture of things here. Some relief, lots of caves, also lots of streams, and more surface streams in our region of the Green River watershed than once you get down closer to Mammoth Cave, where it gets more dominant as far as the limestone geology and the rivers going underground.
Yeah. What's the from a wildlife standpoint? What would be something that I couldn't even guess? I know you have elk because
I'll give you a good one.
All right.
And elk, yes, probably one of the most successful wildlife reintroduction efforts ever. Reintroduction of elk, which were, of course, historically native to Kentucky. Our Department of Fish and Wildlife and other state agencies, state parks and others have worked hard over the years. You know, there was a time when white-tailed deer were extremely rare in Kentucky. There was a time when wild turkeys were very rare in Kentucky. That does show you that, of course, game management has had an impact, because not many places you can drive today late in the evening and not see deer and not cringe when you think about the sound of your bumper, you know. But as far as wildlife that people might not expect or might be surprised to know that they could see, I'm going to give you one that'll probably freak you out a little bit, and that's an armadillo.
Really?
We do have armadillos in Kentucky, and it's not just within the last year or two. I think it was maybe 8-10 years ago. We got a call, and I get a lot of these calls, or my colleagues over in science, if it's something in this region. Do we have this here? Do we have that here? Et cetera, et cetera. I think I just saw an armadillo, and I'm like, well, I don't know. They're not real common. I've not heard any other reports, but in this case, it was easy because it was a roadkill.
Yeah.
So I know we were talking about Texas earlier. Well, that's
Armadillo Central.
Armadillo Central.
It's all those Texans moving in.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, armadillos run out of space down there in Big Texas. But you know, they have expanded their range. They're one of a number of species expand and contract their ranges. This one is expanding, just like coyotes expanded from out west over the years and moved into Kentucky. But yeah, that was a roadkill armadillo, and I called my good friend Chris Mason, who's our district private lands biologist with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, and he said, yeah, he said, we don't see them very often, but we have been getting some reports, just like with bears. I mean, we're now getting pretty regular reports of bear sightings. You know.
Do you think that's pushing out of the urban areas, or is it just?
Well,
or
no,
is it
I think it's a combination of things, really. I think part of it is management. Part of it is the success of various conservation programs and private landowners who are putting more into managing their lands for wildlife. And so where you had bears being more commonly seen, say in East Tennessee, because now they have more wild lands to traverse through. Of course, they're going to always face a risk when they try to cross something like the Cumberland Parkway, moving south, from south to north. So places like McQuarrie County and Pulaski County, down in those areas, we were already getting reports of those, to the point where, you know, Fish and Wildlife was beginning some trapping programs and some other monitoring surveys and so forth for black bear. But over the past, 5 to 10 years, there's multiple reports up here, even in Taylor County, Greene County. Mostly, I'm told that those are mostly male bears that are a little precocious, and perhaps are feeling their oats and moving out, trying to avoid competition, maybe with other dominant males and that kind of thing. So,
I thought you were going to say Sasquatch earlier.
I have used that one before. I think we have a social media group with our students and alumni, and a few years ago I actually found a nice picture of Sasquatch. And it could have been the real one, I don't know, but it was a picture, and I did post it for a moment as a joke, at least, saying it was sighted at Clay Hill Memorial Forest. So
I saw those metal cutouts that people have, and this one had on camo gear, and I'm like, well, no wonder we can't see them. Right, they're borrowing our camo. I want to take you back for a little bit here, and for nostalgia's sake, and what's that first memory? Do you remember, like, your first memory of feeling like really connected to nature and really sort of getting that sense that there's something special about nature? I mean, you grew up on a farm, so I know you were out in.
And I mean, I really, at that time, I didn't actually grow up on the farm.
Okay.
We always had a farm, or we always had some land, because my dad was just an avid farmer. He loved the land, he loved farming, but he was a mechanic by trade. He was a businessman by trade.
Okay.
But we always had a place like that to go. It just so happens that place now is more special than any of those places, because it was his childhood home.
Right.
So that's even more important to me. But for me, it was probably experiences that I would have to attribute to my dad, of going out and fishing and camping. As a young kid, just having that experience of being in a boat on a river or on a lake, and having that interaction, even later, being able to take those fish home and clean them and eat your own catch and those kinds of things. And then as I grew a little older and continued to be interested in that, I remember fondly have memories of, even though we didn't own our family farm at that time, we had some wonderful neighbors who grew up and were friends of my grandfather's, and they used to farm together. They would actually cross the river, across the creek, and exchange labor and help each other in their farm practices. Some of those folks still owned their original farms, so when I got to be a teenager, my dad would take me and my friends out before we were old enough to drive, and load up a tent, Coleman stove, old kerosene lantern, fishing equipment, etc. Enough to keep us busy for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And I can remember I just couldn't hardly wait till 5 o'clock came when I knew Dad was going to be off work, and we were loaded up, ready to go.
Yeah,
and so he would take me and my friends out, dump us out, let the neighbor know, hey, if you don't mind, keep an eye on these boys, you know, make sure everything's okay. But then drop us off and leave. Go back to town, go back home, go back to work, you know. Yeah. And
so you're a teenager at this?
Yeah, you know, 13, 14 years old, and fishing, you know, setting lines for catfish and bait casting during the day and talking with your friends, reading a book, laying in a hammock, you know, whatever, and never really crossed our mind that there was any kind of danger or any problem with being in nature. I think that is something that's changed over time. There are things to be concerned about and that you should prepare for and plan for if you're going to go out in nature and experience it for any period of time.
Right.
But it's not to be feared.
Yeah.
Just be prepared like the Boy Scouts. And then we'd be out there for 2 or 3 nights. And then I'd hear that truck come back, and he's coming back to pick us up. Or usually Dad would come back after work and check on us or join us for dinner.
Right.
Something like that. But yeah, those are some of the special early childhood memories that probably led me closer to where I am today.
What's your favorite fish? What do you? Well, I guess that might be two. Which one do you like to catch and eat? Which one do you like to catch? Those might be two different.
And then there's even another category. So, yeah, as far as for me growing up, I would say freshwater crappie was always the go-to meal for a fish dinner. Usually caught. You could catch them on the river, but usually we're catching those on Green River Lake, of course. You know, a young catfish is always good. A channel catfish that in the 1 to 2 pound range, something like that, always very tasty, fried up the right way. But as far as catching a fish, smallmouth bass, no comparison in our area, particularly a stream caught bass. So if you occasionally, you'll see somebody post a picture catching a 20, 21, maybe 22 inch smallmouth bass on the Green River. It's really a trophy fishery for smallmouth. And thank goodness most of those people are catch and release fishermen, because I just continue to see wonderful reports of big fish being caught on places like, you know, the Green River between the dam and Greensburg, for instance.
And are those reports also the number of fish? Because I know that just about everything seems to be in decline from a fish standpoint. Just
yeah, you know, that would come from there's a study that the department does of Fish and Wildlife, and actually it was something I participated in before going to grad school. Actually, I had a little break in my career between undergrad and grad school, and one of the things I did was I went to work for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I became a creel officer. And for folks who don't know what that term means, when you talk about the term creel, it's talking about a catch, you know, the number of fish that you have, the kinds of fish that you have. And one way the department does an assessment is they will either interview fishermen, monitor how many they're catching, look at their limits, but then also do surveys like electrofishing surveys, or it could be seining or other methods on a river or creek. And they kind of use all of that information to try to determine how sustainable that fishery is, and do the limits need to be changed, and it gets pretty contentious with fishermen. I think everybody has their own opinion, you know.
Sure.
But I did that for about a year, and it was a great experience. It was actually one season, but it was also a great experience. It just further confirmed for me, I guess, my interest in fishes, because my research background is in stream fish ecology. Okay. So I get really excited, and my students will tell you this, the ones that have been out with me. And by the way, sometimes that's contagious. When I pull a net through the water in one of our local, even a small stream, all the way up to the Green River, and I pull out these little fish that live on the bottom of the river, the bottom of Russell Creek, and they look like something that was pulled off of a coral reef, off of a nature PBS documentary, you know.
Yeah.
And those are species like darters. They're small. Most of them don't get over the length of your index finger as an adult, and they are adapted to live out their entire life on the bottom of those streams, one group of them at least, and just beautiful. And so I grew up studying them in grad school. Those were the groups that I studied. I worked here quite a bit on projects with Dr. Gordon Weddle, who also was an expert on a number of those species of fishes. And so I continue to get excited by those, particularly in the springtime when it's mating season or leading up to mating season, and the males are just extremely colorful, just like male songbirds would be in the forest. So.
Well, that was what I was wondering. How did you get? So you had some really good childhood experiences, but and then you went for your undergrad.
Right.
When did you decide that? Well, I mean, that higher ed was what you wanted to do?
I found my calling right here. I went to Berea College. I spent 1 year at Berea College trying to find myself.
Right, sure.
I didn't quite find my calling there, but in essence, it also led me somewhere. I did realize that what I did not want to do, and at the time I thought I was going to major in history, minor in phys ed, and probably coach a sport at a high school somewhere. I was a high school athlete in 4 sports, and I loved track and cross country and basketball. And but I transferred to Campbellsville College at the time, and for some reason, I don't even remember now why. I think it was one of those things where your dad sits you down and says, okay, you've had this year, and we're going to keep helping pay for this education, but we also want to know that this education is actually going to lead somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think I started thinking more seriously about a career. And I got to thinking, what things interest me? And it went back to some of those childhood memories, I think.
Yeah.
And so I took a class that we still offer. It's very interesting. I took this class. At the time, it was taught by Dr. Gordon Weddle, who I later became a research colleague with and a teaching colleague with. And it was called zoology. Really, it's more of an invertebrate zoology class, the study of animals, the relationships between animals, their anatomy and physiology and all those good things. And I don't know, it was somewhere in the midst of taking that class, a light went off, and I just said, these are things I'm interested in. Surely I can find something to do with this background. And I just went from there. I did undergraduate research here at Campbellsville, and it was on fishes. It was an little environmental project just down the road in Greene County.
Was the research part interesting to you at first,
or
was it just okay?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just, like I said, these activities or these events confirm things. They either, you either get a red light or a green light. You do something. That's part of the college experience.
Right.
And I try to share that. I know you do too with your students. This is a learning experience. Very rarely, I think, do people really know 100% that this is what I'm going to do at age 19.
Yeah.
And
it's no different now than when we were coming
in the 80s,
undergraduates.
I think that has not changed. I agree with you. But yeah, the research experience that I had here, I thought I would like it, and when I did it, it just confirmed that I did like it. So that's what led me to graduate school ultimately at the University of Louisville.
At U of L?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your focus? What was your
area? My master's was in biology, and I looked at ecological relationships between some of those fishes we just talked about, those darters. I looked at, what they ate, where they lived, how did they coexist, how do they live together in harmony, something maybe we could learn from them. So I finished that degree and got married and decided, for me to really have a shot at doing some things that I really want to do, which might have even included coming back somewhere like Campbellsville, I probably needed to keep going. Yeah. And so U of L had a degree at that time called a PhD in environmental biology. And so that entailed doing more fish work, more fish ecology work, But this time I ratcheted it up a little bit because I was a member of U of L's Large River Laboratory, working on the Ohio River. So a little different,
bit bigger than
from Russell Creek or the Green River up here at least. But it was a great experience. I loved graduate school. I loved the camaraderie. I loved working with other lab mates and us all working as a team to help with each other's projects, even though it might be on something dealing with a totally different subject or animal group or whatever.
How did you get to Campbellsville? Was that so?
Well, I grew up in Greene County, so
you just
it was closer to home, and it was one of those things of just. You know, my future wife was here, and my parents were just down the road, and it looked like it was going to be an easier path for me, at least, not necessarily academically, but financially and logistically.
Well, being
come
around
and finish a degree
families, I
here.
mean, there's something to be said about being.
There's a lot to be said for that. A whole lot. For most of our family, there could be somebody in your closet somewhere that maybe you don't want to be around. So you know that's between you and them.
That
for me,
uncle,
most of my family,
uncle you only see at the
Thanksgiving,
or
whatever.
We talked a little bit about the relationship between society and the environment, and I want to work off of that a little bit and just ask the question about: do you think people? Do they understand that connection? I guess really what I'm asking about is conservation.
Yeah.
Like, do people really understand what conservation is? I mean, we all understand recycling, but that's not that's like a piece of the bigger puzzle. So,
again, there's all kinds of surveys, and particularly from the conservation ed, group. They're always trying to figure out where are we as a society. I can tell you where I think we are with regards to the kinds of students that we get here in the environmental science program, but for society at large, that's even a little bit different question. I don't think there's any question compared to when I was a kid, when you were a kid, that the majority of society that's our age or particularly younger than us are much more aware today of some of these conservation issues, challenges, et cetera, than I think we've ever been in the past. But the question I think for me is where do we go from there? If we have good science that's telling us that certain systems are struggling, water pollution is an issue here because of X, Y, or Z. We have some important species here that are on the brink of extinction. I think we've gotten to the point now where we understand that it's important that we take care of the environment, that we exhibit some type of stewardship, for lack of a better word, of these resources. And that if you want to look at it from kind of a selfish perspective, it's that we're really only doing ourselves a favor,
and our children.
And our children. Yeah. Now, for me, it goes a little deeper than that. I mean, I truly feel like we owe something to the environment. We owe something for the gifts we've been given. Yeah. And so for me, it goes a little further than just, well, if I don't do this, I'm not going to get this benefit in return. Right. I think there's got to be a little greater good involved here. And I think we're getting there. Yeah. It's an ethic. It's certainly an ethic, and environmental ethics as a topic, as subjects, philosophy has been around for decades, and we're still not, I think, where we need to be yet. But I do think we're also further than ever before along the path of having an understanding that mankind and myself as an individual, that I am part of this bigger organism that is life. That's if you want to call it the web of life, or what was the Disney movie with Simba and the circle of life.
Circle of life, yeah.
If you want to think of it from that perspective, that we're probably one of the few species, though, that has the capacity to, by changing our behaviors or how we do things, to have a positive impact for almost all the other species.
Yeah.
So I think that's both exciting and daunting.
Yeah. Well, too much is given, much is required, is the old saying.
That's great. That's a great way of putting it. I've put it that way before myself.
As we're talking about ways to help and be good stewards, what are some of the, in this area in particular, but you can branch it out regionally or whatever, what are 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 of the big things that we need to be thinking about in terms of environmental damage, I guess?
I think, really as individuals, because everything starts with the individual, really, there's no way to get away from that. When we make purchases, it's just like you're voting with your wallet. I mean, you're helping determine what's on the shelf and whether it's a sustainable product or not. How we are as a local citizen of the community, how we carry ourselves about in terms of our actions. Right. It all starts there, and then it needs to grow from there, obviously. But locally, I don't know, I might not even get off this topic, but for me locally, it's littering. I know you expected me to say over-harvesting of wildlife or water pollution, and those are problems. And I would put the water pollution and the littering kind of does go together because
it all runs off.
Both degrading our environment, but I'm just concerned about our community in terms of what I see, and even sometimes on our campus. That we just need to be better stewards of just our room. And our room might be the parking lot over here at Kroger or campus at CU or whatever. And it's a shame that we have to hire people or have, prisoners, walking the roads. And I've lived in this community most of my life, and I'm up in my mid-50s now. So I probably have a somewhat short memory. I know litter used to be a major problem, but I see it as a continuing problem. Yeah. And to me, it's a concern because it says something about a mindset. If we're not considerate enough of our fellow man or our fellow businesses or whoever we're trying to attract here in our community to keep from securing our garbage or throwing the cigarette butt out the window or the fast food cup or Kroger bag or whatever. I don't just mean not Kroger, grocery bag in general, but then what does that say about, how likely are we to be concerned about water quality, or how likely are we to be concerned about doing our part to help conserve endangered species? Yeah. Probably not very likely. So we need more awareness around that issue, I think, right now in our community.
That's I hadn't really thought about it that way. I mean, you see the litter and you think in your mind, well, why? But that for whatever reason, whoever throws, and that doesn't mean that we all don't sometimes accidentally, or
exactly.
But I guess the point being, why? Why does someone feel compelled that that doesn't matter?
And sometimes it's not even intentional. I understand that as well, and I've been a party to this before unintentionally. You're driving down the road and you don't have something in your pickup truck secured. Yeah. And it might be a paper item or an aluminum can or something else. And so there are lots of things people can do to improve that part. Now, it
but
sounds
when you
like
see the arm out the window,
and
that's pretty intentional.
And it seems like more of an aesthetic issue, but it really does go beyond that too, because as you mentioned, all things live downstream. So whether it's an actual pollutant that's going into our waterway, or whether it's litter that's washing into our waterway, it's impacting habitat and water quality and animals and plants and so forth.
I know we don't have a lot of heavy industry here, mostly farming, and I don't want us to get off on some of the nuances there, but do those have a big impact? And I know from a farming standpoint, they've been trying to minimize things like runoff with, by
Definitely.
by no till and things like that.
Yeah, and that's an area we actually have made just phenomenal strides in since the early 70s. Again, not to say there's not still work to be done. We're still seeing problems with certain chemicals that originate in Kentucky, and even more so in Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, etc., that then get transported down to the Gulf of Mexico and contribute to things like algal blooms and rob oxygen from the environment in the Gulf. Because that algae is eaten by bacteria and other animals, which then their populations explode and consume the oxygen, et cetera, et cetera. We call that the Great Gulf Hypoxia Zone. It's a big area in the Gulf. And again, why should I know about that? If you're not reading science or listening to some stories about this, you might not even know this. But some of the fertilizers especially contribute to this as they accumulate or wash off the landscape if they're used in too great a quantity or at the wrong times or whatever, misapplied perhaps. That stuff really does go somewhere. Yeah. The farmer wants it to go in the ground. They want it to feed their plants, not feed the river.
Get the most out of that.
Exactly.
Input, yeah.
So it's better for both sides of the issue. For it to work as advertised. But unfortunately, we do have issues with a lot of it being transported to the Gulf, and to the point where a lot of commercial fisheries down there have become very concerned about it. And so there's ongoing studies trying to determine how big is this hypoxic zone. Can we detect it shrinking if we make changes upstream? But they know it's there because they know they don't catch a lot of fish there. They actually avoid those areas. The commercial fishermen avoid a lot of those areas. They know where they are, they mark them on their maps, and they go elsewhere.
But they do, there's nurseries down there, fisheries rather. And,
definitely.
And talking about full circle.
Absolutely,
so,
yes.
Here we go, and we go to the store and buy,
and
buy
we
some
have to
fresh
buy it
food.
here.
Yeah.
And it's maybe costing us more because it's requiring greater effort to come up with the same amount of catch.
Yeah.
Same thing. I'll give you another, since you mentioned food, and get me started here, but I love shrimp. Oh, I love shrimp. And I'm kind of like Forrest Gump, and Bubba Gump. I like it about any way I can get it,
Yeah.
But my students are surprised in a couple classes. I do share with them the life history of Gulf shrimp, brown and white shrimp, and the fact that you're used to seeing a shrimp boat perhaps a few miles offshore. If you go to the beach, you visit the beach. I like to go to the beach. I look out there, see a big shrimping vessel out there, maybe at night with their lights on. I'm thinking, boy, that's dinner
Fresh
tomorrow.
in the morning.
Fresh tomorrow, exactly. But what most people, and our students as well, don't understand is that shrimp life cycle actually began near shore, up in some of the tidal rivers and tidal bays, up in some of the marsh grass, where they reproduce before they then return to the ocean to grow out into adults. So any pollution that's coming down in those rivers or creeks, or some of the massive amounts of development that now we're having to rethink with regards to hurricane damage and some other stuff, that can in turn have an influence on shrimp populations out offshore.
Well, just out of curiosity, I know that conservation, in particular, and when I say that, I'm wildlife management, things like that.
Yeah.
That's not new. That's been around for a while. Roosevelt was one of
really where a lot of conservation ethic and conservation science started was more specific to wildlife management, particularly from a sport hunting perspective, or of game and sustenance, that kind of thing. But yeah, you mentioned Teddy Roosevelt. He's really the father of the conservation movement in our country, if you want to go back to one point in time.
And so more recently, and you've been involved in this, so you see us making progress, and students that you get are already ahead of, in terms of just an awareness.
I think so.
Maybe not an enlightenment but
Yeah, but definitely, I feel like you said, just in terms of an awareness, there is a greater awareness, and that just speaks to a general emphasis that's grown over the years of having maybe a better understanding of why the environment is important, why nature is important, certainly how we benefit from it is part of that. And that in turn, to be effective stewards of it, we got to be training people who understand how it works. I used to tell students that, if I wanted to tell somebody how to fix my car, or if I wanted to, back in the day, get my carburetor fixed. So again, you got to be about 40 or older to know what a carburetor was. But that was one of my dad's specialties. People would come to him like they would come to Goober Pyle or Wally on Andy Griffith if their car's making a noise. Well, they'd come from counties around for carburetor work. And so what I share with people, including my students, is that, so if we're going to solve an environmental problem, we're going to think about that environment like the car or the car engine, then we got to have you trained to understand all the different operational systems and it is big and it is complex. And some people like to work from this big level up here, like an ecosystem scientist, which is important. But there are others. I kind of like to work at different levels, but I really like to work at a very local level, like looking at a fish community or looking at locations on the Green River and trying to determine their environmental quality or their habitat or how the species are doing there, or anything in between. So, our goal is to get them to understand that there's a certain skill set that they need in common with other environmental scientists, and then they may need to go deeper depending on where they want to go with their career.
What does a healthy environment look like?
Or smell like?
or smell like, all of the...
Yeah,
I mean...
Well, what we would say, and what, it's what we promoted a lot within the Nature Conservancy, who I worked for about 9 years as a project director on the Green River, is nature, we have to meet it on its terms and realize that we bring certain positives, but we also bring a lot of negatives to the table. Yeah. And there's very few places on Earth today, even those special places we talked about that we like to go and get away, et cetera, there's very few places on Earth today that aren't either inhabited by humans or somehow impacted by the actions of humans. So to try to come up with some determination of what a healthy environment is, and to say, well, it's an environment with no humans, well, that's unfair, because there's just not many places like that around. Now, it is true that a lot of those places without humans probably are more intact, and I would use a word like this, more functional. So I think we are interested in seeing ecosystems and all their parts that, first of all, are all the parts there? If those parts are there, are they all doing their jobs? By that I mean, plants have a role to play, animals have a role to play, there's carnivores, herbivores, all the food webs, etc. How functional is that environment? How functional is that habitat? Is it able to provide resources for us too? Right. One of the worst things that can ever happen, whatever the cause is, but particularly if it's human caused, is to somehow reduce the productivity of an environment, its ability to produce a product, whether it's energy for itself or whether it's a product that helps support us. We ought to be concerned if we see that ecosystems are somehow not able to do that.
Breaking down.
Yeah.
Well, as you were describing that, I just kept thinking of your analogy about the mechanic and sort of being, if someone brought their vehicle to your dad and he told them, well, this is what's going on and this is why, maybe it's time to change unless you want to.
Let's just go with that. That's a wonderful analogy, because I can't tell you how many times I used to work in my dad's business. That was a summer job for me. but how many times I could hear him, a customer would come in, one of two things would happen. They would either try to tell him what was going on, get his opinion, but they had already decided that they knew what was wrong with the vehicle and that was not it.
Right.
Or once he told them what it was and found out how much it was going to cost to fix it, then maybe they changed their mind about wanting to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just live with it or whatever. Well, kind of the same way with the environment. If I come to you as an environmental scientist and I say, look, this river is failing. We've seen declines in species, we've seen increases in this pollutant or that pollutant, then the question comes to you as society or you as mayor or city council member or voter, whatever. Yeah. What do we think, how important is it and to what extent do we want to go to try to fix that? And everybody depends on a healthy environment.
Yeah.
We can't live without it, folks.
I think we take it for granted, yeah. And that brings up a question about, we were talking about civil discourse earlier, and the idea that freedom of speech, that I can have an opinion, but part of my responsibility too is to listen.
Right. Right.
And so where do you think that comes in this discourse? Because it doesn't take long for, if
great
you have,
point.
People who believe one way or another.
I tell you one thing that and exactly, I'll just keep using that example of my dad. Again, if I want to know what's wrong with my car, I'm going to go talk to my dad, the mechanic.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go talk to the banker. I'm not going to talk to the shoemaker or, the restaurant owner, whatever. So if I'm interested in figuring out a problem relating to the environment, I want to talk to a scientist. Now, talking about sharing opinions, and it's such an important part of public discourse and exchange. But of course, in science, we have opinions, but we deal with data. Yeah. And you can interpret that data how you would like. But we're going to try to hold you to what the data is actually showing, what that trend is or is not or whatever, based on the data, not based on how I feel about the issue or what I would like to see done because of where this is happening or it's next to my special retreat or whatever. We're going to deal with the data and what the science, what the experiments tell us. And we would hope then what that means is you can have an informed opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Instead of us just coming together because of something we heard on a social media outlet and it strikes a chord with me because I kind of have this bent to my personality and it strikes a different chord with you and those chords happen to do this.
Right.
Then let's bring the science in.
Right. The fish are dying. Something's
yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
And are we going to fix it? That's what that ends up being part of the
Are
discourse.
we going to fix it? And then we can have discourse about how are we going to fix it?
Yeah.
Or what kind of policy is needed? What type of program would be effective? And making sure everybody is at the table, but knowing that we're having a discussion that's based on informed opinions. Yeah. Well, and that's a role that I think is very important for science to play, and to be honest with you, one we've not done a very good job with. In environmental science in general, in science over the past 50 years.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Is it because
we've not been good communicators?
The analytical mind.
Too analytical.
It's difficult to pass that.
We work in a research-driven peer review approach.
You got to know the jargon, and nobody else outside the business knows it. Yeah.
Farmer Brown down the road here couldn't care less about whether or not a mussel glochidium finds its way to the substratum at the right time of the year so that it experiences good recruitment into the next cohort.
Yeah.
Well, what the heck did I just say?
Yeah.
What I said was...
I heard mussel.
Yeah, that's all you heard, and that's all he would hear. But he might really like mussels.
Yeah.
It
might be an indication of something that's happening that's going to affect him.
He might know that mussels, this is a great example of this, happened years ago when I was with the Nature Conservancy, a little community outside of Mumfordville in Hart County. And, unfortunately, a quarry was looking to reopen an old quarry right on the river. But now you had a lot of different landowners around that area. And of course, they didn't want to see that not in my backyard, the NIMBY argument. And it's amazing how fast they fell in love with freshwater mussels and learned about their life history. And but you know, what I was telling Farmer Brown was that when this mussel makes a baby, it has to find a fish, and it has to take a meal from that fish and grow out a little bit, and then it falls off that fish, and we want it to fall off in a place that has clean sand or substrate, and then grow into another adult mussel. So we have mussels always being propagated back into the population. But all that jargon, you know, if I just came and presented that at a meeting, yeah, that's information, but you're still not going to have an informed
But all that jargon
opinion.
was a common sense thing. You know, at the end of it, there was.
It's how we communicate it. That's what it's all about, and we're doing a much better job now understanding, you know, and certainly a lot of people like myself who work in the fields of environmental biology, you know, I have a strong conservation ethic, no question about it. I don't apologize for that. I think the environment is extremely important for me, for my children, my family, for my my grandchildren, etc. But I can't let that affect the work that I do, and the data that I present, you know, has to still stand on its own, and then let people use that to help better inform themselves. So I can't have an agenda, because then the science isn't even dependable. So that's why we have to always be on the lookout for what we in the business call baloney science or pseudoscience.
Yeah, and bias creeps into everything, but
it does.
If we don't admit it and say, here's where I'm coming from, but here's the research that I did, you know, and the thing is, you can't be, especially as a scientist, be so dead set that even if the results are not what you wanted, I mean, that's part of being a scientist. Accept that, okay, that wasn't my hypothesis. I thought, you know,
and we have to dig, you know, we have to do a better job communicating it, but also citizens and leaders, et cetera, have to do a better job, you know, digging into it and finding what the true message is in that data, and talking about digging, you know, even as a scientist, when I'm looking at results from a particular project, research project or whatever, I'm also concerned about who funded it, you know. Where did the funding come from? You know, why do 4 out of 5 dentists agree that this is the product I should be putting on my teeth? You know, what's really behind that? Somebody's paying for that commercial.
That's right.
By the way.
And it could be true.
And it might be true. It might be, but it also introduces a little...
Some transparency is
exactly.
Needed.
So we also need to be transparent as scientists, and we also need to better communicate the results of the work that we're doing. And that goes across the board, because, you know, we can talk about, like we have been, environmental issues like pollution, for instance, but even the fish and wildlife biologists, the fish or the game biologists know that it's a contentious world of sportsmen and sportswomen out there, when they have in their own mind, like that person who brought their car into my dad they already knew, well, then why did you bring it in, you know? So got to be willing to open up and listen. These people are, you know, as long as we can see that they're transparent and they're using good sound science and scientific approaches, let's see what the data tells us and then develop your opinion around that.
Yeah, and the more folks that we can bring in, the better solution that's possible.
Exactly, yeah.
Before I ask the final question, is there anything else you want to, like, you know, we've talked about it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that that you have?
I don't know. I just, you know, I guess I would hope that if people have heard a little bit of my background, and maybe there may be some people out there that already formed an opinion about me and the work that I've done over the years. But I hope what you come away with is that, you know, for me, there's no agenda in the work that I do beyond wanting to do what I feel is right. And what I feel is right is not only based on my life philosophy, but it also is viewed through the lens of science, and trying to use that to help me make informed decisions about how to be a better citizen of this earth, or of this very community, or of my own neighborhood. And I just hope people can accept some of the things we've talked about here in that light today, and can be asking themselves, you know, what can I do to be a better influence on the environment, or a better example for future generations.
Yeah. My last question is about artificial intelligence. How do you think artificial intelligence is going to impact environmental sciences, or just environmental work in general?
I think that's a good question to ask about virtually any discipline that we're
I do.
facing.
That's my last question. That's why I leave it for the end.
And so as an environmental scientist or biologist, obviously this, you know, that side of technology is certainly not not in my wheelhouse. But when I think along those lines, I guess what concerns me most is there's benefits as well as hurdles. Like we were talking earlier off camera about you know, the use of technology and social media and some other things. I guess we were talking about it earlier in the interview as well. But on one hand, it's this idea, I wouldn't call it artificial intelligence though necessarily, but I'll use that. It's the concept of big data.
Yeah.
And one thing we are doing more of that I think has the potential to be extremely helpful in the decisions that we make and the policies that we make is the use of big data, and then thinking about how do we generate this big data. Because there's only so much one field researcher like myself can do in terms of, I can go out here every year, multiple days out of the year, and collect water samples out of Buckhorn Creek out here, and I can tell you a little bit about Buckhorn Creek, but only to the degree of how many days and how many years or whatever my career lasted doing that.
Right.
We are now doing some things, we call it citizen science. And we've realized that there are things we can do, there's data that we can generate, and of course in the sciences we know, as long as the data is dependable, it's being collected in a scientifically valid way, we can depend on that being a good data point, a meaningful data point. The more of that data we can get, the better, the better conclusions we can draw about whatever the issue is. So a number of different disciplines in the field of conservation science and environmental biology have for the past several years been engaging with local citizens groups, citizens networks, citizen networks to enlist their assistance in going out and collecting this kind of data that then we can accumulate so much more data, and it's usually things that doesn't require somebody with a master's degree or PhD for sure to go out and do, like collecting a water sample. Now you don't have to decide what's in that water. All you got to do is follow the directions. I'm going to dip this water in this way, I'm going to put it on ice, I'm going to take it over here to this office. And then from that office it goes to a laboratory, and it actually gets analyzed then, of course, by an expert, an environmental scientist or whatever. But if we can have thousands and thousands of people doing that in streams and rivers across our country, all of a sudden we can start developing a much clearer picture, more dependable picture of the health of our streams.
Yeah.
So we do that with water quality, we do it with animal populations, particularly birds. I'm a bird, I love birding too, and we have come so far, and there are so many birders in our country that are, I mean, excellent, and they can identify these species, and what we need is to be able to gather that data from all of those individuals and pour it into one place and then try to make sense out of that data. And we're doing that now with apps on our phones where we can record sightings, and then that gets uploaded to a central server somewhere.
Right, right.
And so that's not specifically artificial intelligence.
Yeah, but
it's on that trajectory.
As you were speaking, I envisioned this grid system, and yeah, you're here in this little of that map of even Kentucky, and you're in this little grid, and there's some There are apps out there that do it, not specifically.
Yeah.
It may be. I mean,
Right.
there's so many things out there. But if you started filling in that grid, then not only would you have a more accurate view of everything, but if that was something that you got data over time, like once a month or a quarter even.
It could really help us save a lot of time and money, for instance, on our planning in communities for community development and community growth, where we build.
Or even tracking something that's happened. Maybe it's not even something that anybody really knew about.
Right.
I don't know, that something's flowing into the stream, upstream, and all of a sudden you start seeing a negative, or a warning sign.
Right.
Well, if you catch it then pretty quickly, it might.
Time to do something. Maybe.
Same thing with the wildlife, I guess.
Now, with the artificial intelligence line of questioning you were going on there, I would say one thing that would concern me there is that we can generate big data on one hand, and we can do things with that. We can analyze that with all kinds of different statistics, but then we do get to that next level of, okay, what do we do with this data? How does it leverage a decision?
Prediction.
And what is that decision? What is that prediction? What's that model? And then what's it telling us? And then how are we going to decide what to do with this information?
Yeah.
Gets back to the human element. There are some things that artificial intelligence can see trends, can develop logarithms, algorithms. And in turn we can pay attention to that, just like with all of our social media, and let it drive us into whatever corner or basement we want it to drive us into.
Think about it from the standpoint of, not to interrupt, but
yeah.
If yes, it can show trends and all, but that's already available. What we want is some idea about prediction.
Yeah.
And so if you think about environmental impact and really being transparent, I mean, let's be honest that,
yeah.
Okay, so if we were to introduce this new pollutant because someone wants to build,
right.
And it's going to, all the stuff associated, new jobs, new industry, all of that, but what's the environmental impact?
Yeah.
You can add prediction to.
Oh, absolutely.
As part of the AI that says, okay, well, if there's this amount, this is what happens. This amount, what happened, and so that's where the decision support.
But it's still, in that case, it's still a model that there is a human or a scientist or some person, for instance, who's even deciding what the input should be into the decision model. The point I was getting at is, we could even use AI to tell us, here's the 5 different possible decisions that you could make given these different scenarios on what the impact might be. But ultimately, I think most of us agree at least, is that we want people need to make public policy. People need to make policy.
Well,
At the end of the day, think about there's a lot of intangibles out there that AI may not be able to consider. It's just looking at the data.
Yeah, and let's admit, just based
we'll all be out of a job.
Based on we might be out of more than that if AI decides.
Yeah.
Well, the best thing we could
get rid of humans. Let's don't go there. That's been one thing I've been proud of in the past too, is that, particularly with my work here and at the Nature Conservancy, Bernheim Forest now as a board member there, is finding ways for compatibility, ways that we can make a difference, that we actually can live harmoniously with the environment, but it just takes commitment and it takes a little bit of work on our part too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your
time. You're welcome,
time.
Thomas.
Thank you for joining me on this episode and my guest, Dr. Richie Kessler. And make sure and click the subscribe button or turn on notifications so that you can find out when new episodes are uploaded.